The Crusades, an era of fierce religious wars, treacherous alliances, and unspeakable atrocities, remains one of history's most captivating and mysterious periods. But what if I told you that the truth about the Crusades isn't what you've been taught? Imagine warriors donning armor, but instead of fighting for land, they're fighting for power, wealth, and religious domination, all while shaking the very foundations of the medieval world. Picture this. In the midst of these holy wars, a pope excommunicates an entire army, and a knight, believing he's received a divine calling, sets out to conquer the Holy Land, but ends up getting lost in a deadly series of internal wars that nobody predicted. Intrigued yet? Buckle up, because these strange and mind-bending facts from the Crusades are about to take you down a rabbit hole of deception, obsession, and mystery that could change the way you view history forever. Let's start with a peculiar and little-known fact. During the First Crusade, thousands of knights, who were supposed to be fighting for the glory of God, ended up engaging in mass slaughter not of Muslims, but of fellow Christians. Yes, you heard that right. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, instead of marching towards the Holy Land, the Crusaders, under the orders of the Pope, diverted their attention to a Christian city, Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. What followed was one of the most shocking betrayals in history. Crusaders sacking a Christian city and pillaging its treasures. They looted the city, desecrated churches, and killed innocent civilians. But what's truly bizarre is how this event has been largely overshadowed in favor of focusing on the supposed holy motives of the Crusaders. So, why did this happen? Was it the lust for wealth, power, or simply the realization that this mission might not bring the glory promised by the Pope? The answer lies in a deep-seated political struggle, one that many historians believe was not just about faith, but control of the Eastern Mediterranean. But let's turn the lens to the Crusaders themselves, the very knights who charged into battle under the banner of righteousness. Were they as noble as we're led to believe? Surprisingly, many Crusaders were motivated by nothing more than the promise of wealth. Most had little to no interest in the Holy Land's religious significance, and many were actually driven by the desire to escape poverty or flee criminal charges back home. Take, for example, the infamous Godfrey of Bouillon, one of the leaders of the First Crusade. He's often painted as a hero who liberated Jerusalem. But did you know he initially showed little regard for the idea of ruling Jerusalem as a Christian kingdom? Instead, after capturing the city in 1099, he refused to wear a crown, stating that only Christ could be king. His decision, at first glance, might seem pious and humble, but it also raises questions. Was it true devotion to God, or a shrewd political maneuver to maintain control over his new territory without appearing overly power-hungry? And what about the brutal way the Crusaders slaughtered the city's Muslim and Jewish inhabitants after their victory? Did Godfrey and his fellow knights have a divine justification for this, or were they simply playing a game of politics, using religion as a cloak for conquest? Then there's the incredibly bizarre story of the Children's Crusade, a strange and tragic episode that might make you question everything you thought you knew about the Crusades. In 1212, a group of French and German children, some as young as 10, set out on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, believing they could peacefully reclaim it from the Muslims. But what happened next was horrific. The children were sold into slavery by unscrupulous merchants, with many never even making it out of the Mediterranean. How could this happen? It's one of the most perplexing and chilling tales of the entire Crusader era. Children, driven by a deep religious fervor, placed their trust in a movement that promised them salvation, only to find themselves abandoned, enslaved, or worse. The idea of innocent children being caught up in such a violent and misguided campaign isn't just shocking. It's an eerie reflection of the warped thinking that dominated the Crusades. Could it be that the adults in charge, people like the church and monarchs, exploited the religious innocence of these children for their own purposes? Now let's dive into something even more intriguing. Did the Crusades spark the creation of some of the most iconic weapons in history? Consider the famous crossbow, a weapon that would forever change the nature of medieval warfare. Introduced during the Crusades, the crossbow was a game changer, as it allowed even the least trained soldier to kill with pinpoint accuracy. But here's where things get interesting. The Church, which had been supportive of the Crusades, actually condemned the use of the crossbow on several occasions, calling it a dishonorable weapon. Why? Because it was thought to be too powerful and not requiring the skill and chivalry that traditional knights' weapons demanded. The idea that the Church, an institution that promoted war and violence on such a grand scale, would deem a weapon dishonorable, reveals a stunning paradox. Religious leaders were, at once, champions of war and yet sought to regulate how that war was fought. What were they truly afraid of? And then, let's talk about the infamous Knights Templar. These warrior monks became legendary not only for their prowess on the battlefield, but for their strange and secretive ways. They amassed unimaginable wealth and power, becoming a shadowy organization that some believe had ties to mysterious forces far beyond the grasp of common men. The Templars were allegedly protectors of the Holy Grail, or at least believed to have been. But the truth is far stranger. In 1307, the King of France, fearing the Templars' power, arrested their members and accused them of heresy, leading to their brutal execution. The real question here is, were they truly guilty of the charges brought against them? Or were they the victims of a political conspiracy? Some even suggest that the Templars possessed knowledge that could alter the course of history. Were they protectors of sacred secrets? Or were they simply a medieval version of a secret society, whose enigmatic behavior led them to their downfall? Let's not forget the strange psychology behind the Crusades. These wars weren't just about territory, wealth, or power. There was something darker at play. In the minds of the Crusaders, fighting for the Holy Land became not just a mission, but an obsession. It consumed them, distorting their sense of morality and justice. The more they fought, the more they seemed to lose touch with reality. Crusaders would travel across vast distances, endure immense hardships, and yet often turn on each other or lose their way entirely. Did the promise of heavenly rewards blind them to the horrors they were committing on the ground? What made them willing to sacrifice so much for a cause that was, in many cases, fueled by personal greed, political maneuvering, and propaganda? The answer may lie in the religious fervor of the time, a feverish belief that they were doing God's work. But when you step back and look at it from a modern perspective, the entire enterprise of the Crusades seems more like an ancient form of mass manipulation, an engine of war driven by ideology, fear, and power. But here's one of the strangest facts of all. Despite all the bloodshed, despite the massacres, and the centuries of hostility, the Crusades didn't completely sever the bonds between Christians and Muslims. In fact, in some cases, they led to a deeper respect and understanding. After years of fighting, both sides began to recognize the common humanity they shared, even though they were enemies. There's the story of the famous Sultan Saladin, the Muslim leader who became one of the most respected figures in the Crusades for his generosity and chivalric conduct. When he captured Jerusalem in 1187, he allowed the Christian residents to leave unharmed and even offered them protection from the Crusaders who might attack them. This, in many ways, was the opposite of the barbarity that the Crusaders displayed when they captured Jerusalem in 1099. It's a reminder that the Crusades weren't just about religious hatred. They were about complex human dynamics, where honor, strategy, and culture often blurred the lines of simple good versus evil. And finally, perhaps the most bizarre aspect of the Crusades, their long-lasting impact on Europe. The Crusades didn't just reshape the Middle East, they revolutionized Europe itself. By opening up trade routes, bringing back exotic goods like silk, spices, and new technologies, the Crusaders unwittingly sparked the Renaissance. They helped shift Europe from the Dark Ages to the beginning of the modern era. Without the Crusades, would we have had the same explosion of art, science, and exploration that characterized the Renaissance? The Crusaders, ironically, may have laid the groundwork for the very cultural rebirth that would change the world forever. This paradox, a holy war that helped fuel the Age of Enlightenment, reveals just how strange and far-reaching the effects of the Crusades were and how they still resonate with us today. In the end, the Crusades remain a mystery, not just because of their bloody legacy, but because they are filled with contradictions, bizarre events, and tales that defy logic. Were they truly wars of religion, or were they about power, wealth, and political gamesmanship? Did they create heroes or villains? Were they a moment of divine intervention, or just a series of tragic human errors? One thing is certain: the Crusades continue to haunt our imagination, their strange and enigmatic legacy living on in the stories, questions, and lessons they leave behind.